Okay. Beam me up, Scotty. Am I up? Okay. Good evening, Pandora lovers. Okay, time is precious, and we're going to begin our conversation with Tim Westergren, who was born in 1965 in Minnesota, but he was born on December 21st. And I don't know if you understand the significance for someone of Scandinavian descent, as the two of us are, of the winter solstice, because it happens to have been the time when the son of Frigga and Odin was born, Baldur, the most beloved and generous of the Norse gods, right?
Of course, common knowledge.
Yeah, so a very auspicious beginning. Yeah. In 1988, he graduated from Stanford. My sources say that you majored in political science, but you studied musical acoustics and recording technology as well. And then you followed a career path for 20 years in which you were a composer, a musician, a recorder, a person who recorded other bands that otherwise had no exposure, and a nanny.
Yes.
So in at least half of those undertakings, you were taking care of other people,
yes,
as best you could. Then in 1999, several things happened. One, you got film credits for the music in The Last Best Sunday. And with Will Glazer, you developed the Music Genome Project, and you were one of 3 who launched Pandora. And if you will, tell us about the entrepreneurial journey that you took from there.
Sure. Well, it's a treat to be here with Ben. I would travel halfway around the world to share the stage with this guy. Yeah. A national treasure here, for sure. Actually, you could talk the whole time and I'd be perfectly happy just to listen. You know. So yeah, I have kind of it's unlikely for me to be where I am now with Pandora. As Ben said, my first job after Pandora was a nanny. Actually, Manny is the proper word for that. I took care of kids for about 5 years, and my job consisted of getting up about 8 in the morning and jumping on the piano and playing piano until about 2 in the afternoon, going to pick up these 2 young boys from school and taking them home and playing wiffle ball on the street with the kids on the block and making sure they did their homework and practice piano, and then making dinner for the family, and then going home and jumping on the piano till midnight, 1 a.m. and I did that for years. So not the most promising beginning to my vocational life. But I had a love of music, and it's what I graduated with from college, if not a real vocational skill. And I spent 10 years experiencing the life of a musician, doing these weird jobs to pay rent. When I launched the Music Genome Project, it was the very, very apex of the first .com boom. So it was a time when I was living in San Francisco, and there was just this, euphoria around entrepreneurship. So a lot of sort of can-do mentality floating around. And Will and another friend, John Kraft, and I embarked on this journey. And the Genome was really a crazy idea to hire ultimately about 70 musicians to sit down every day and listen to songs and analyze them a song at a time along as many as 450 musical attributes per song, manually. And so it would take 15 or 20 minutes to analyze a pop song and over an hour for a symphonic piece. It was fucking ridiculous. And everybody thought so except a handful of crazy investors that were game to give us a start. And so we spent the first year doing that. And the idea being that we would be able to connect songs by their musical DNA. So in this World Wide Web where there was this infinite catalog of music, where you can never find the stuff you want, you could enter this song or artist you liked, and we would sort of, by marrying musicology and math, hunt down other songs that share similar characteristics. And it would then be a fantastic tool for surfacing all this music you'd never otherwise hear, because it was fundamentally blind to popularity. So the system would go looking for the most logical musical match regardless of how well that band had done. And so we did that for a year. and created our first prototype of the Music Genome Project, long before we were actually Pandora. I still remember the first day we tested it out, typed in a Beatles song, of course, and we had created a software program inside Microsoft Excel, where we had about 20,000 songs analyzed and entered into this spreadsheet. And Will, the software engineer, had built a macro that you entered one of those songs and hit match, and it computed the proximity of that one song to everything else in the collection, and then rank ordered them. It took about 4 minutes for the macro to do this. So we're a year in, we've spent probably about $1 million, and this is the big moment for us, and we wait with bated breath, and the first song that pops up as the closest match was the Bee Gees. I'm like, oh shit, you know? Forgive my profanity, I'm prone to it. So we're in, like, oh, this was a bad idea. Turns out it didn't work. Well, we listened to the song. For those who are Bee Gees fans, yay. I'm one too. The early Bee Gees, before they became famous as a disco band, were essentially a knockoff of the Beatles. And so it had found this one Bee Gees track that was the sort of perfect match for this Beatles song. So from depression to elation in a short period of time, but it seemed to really work. We were running out of money though, and so to make our money last, we began asking our employees to work for a smaller and smaller share of their salary over those coming months. And eventually, at the end of 2001, we weren't paying our employees anything at all. We called that salary deferral back then, which it turns out is illegal in California. And if anybody asks you to work for free in California. And we wound up working without paying people for about 2.5 years. A group of about 50 people stuck around to build this genome project in the hopes that someday we'd find a home for it, which we ultimately did in 2005 when we sort of essentially pivoted the business and repurposed this big database into a personalized radio product, which we launched in the fall of 2005. Renamed the company, of course, and in November of that year, made it available to consumers.
Could I just ask you, the name Pandora, I was talking about Norse mythology. In Greek mythology, the intruder opens Pandora's box and lets all the troubles out into the world. Mm-hmm. But the one thing remaining in the box was hope.
Yes.
Was that what you were referring to at that stage when you named it Pandora?
I should have known, like, entering a talk with Ben on anything related to Greek mythology is asking for trouble. So we love that nugget, of course. But fundamentally, we like the fact that she couldn't help herself. She was curious. And she didn't know what was going to come out of the box. We were not trying to conjure up, pestilence and famine as a brand identity. But we like the adventurousness of it and the fact that, and that's really what Pandora is. You type something in and you don't know what you're going to get. And that's the surprise and delight of it, is what we wanted to. Also, it was easy to spell, easy to remember, and we could get the URL, which is no small feat, even back down in 2005. So we launched it that year, and it just took off like a rocket ship. It hasn't stopped. We have well over 200 million people in the US who've registered for Pandora. We're pushing up on 1,000 employees, 30 offices around the US. We've also launched in Australia and New Zealand. And we account for about a little north of 7% of all of radio listening in the US. And we have grand ambitions now for what this company can become, because I think there's the opportunity to fundamentally change radio. And radio has historically been and continues to be the pipeline to music.
Could I ask you, before we get to the stunning success, about a day of reckoning when those people who had stuck with Pandora for 2.5 years not being paid. Tell me about the day of reckoning when it finally arrived.
Yeah, so we were rescued by a big financing in 2004, raised $9 million from a bunch of institutional investors finally, who I think just figured out, like, these guys are not going away, so there's something there. At that point, it was my 348th venture pitch of that period of time. And it had been such a roller coaster ride that I decided to stop sharing my travails with the company. So I decided I'm not going to talk about fundraising until I can tell them there's money in the bank. So we had an all-hands meeting that morning, the day after the wires had entered our bank account. So I knew the money was there, and called people together for our usual bi-weekly speech to get them to keep working for nothing for 2 more weeks. They weren't joyous all-hands meetings. And instead of that, I just pulled out this huge wad of envelopes from the back of my pocket, and I get goosebumps every time I say this, and handed out people checks for like 2.5 years of salary. I mean, I handed out, I think, just shy of $2 million of money that day. People thought they were going to bounce, I think. There was, like I was playing some cruel joke, but it remains an emotional thing for me, even when I recall it, that there was this team of people that had, to work for nothing for 2.5 years is a weird thing to do, and it has all sorts of, it tortures you in many, many ways, but to be able to, make them whole was a big moment.
It also bespeaks the leadership that you and your partners must have exercised. I mean, you had to persuade them, they had to believe in you. Could you just describe what the dynamic was that made them willing to work for nothing for so long?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of things, I think. You certainly learn to be a leader in those environments. You either learn to be a leader or you exit in a hurry. I think that I've come to believe that the cornerstone of great leadership is humble leadership. And it's being in and among your team, and being the first to do all the hard things. I was the first to stop getting paid, of course. I had 11 maxed out credit cards by the time we got to the end of this period. I had paid salaries on credit cards. And I was a musician, so if this didn't work out, I was completely screwed. I was in a deep, deep chasm. But I always maintain a very healthy level of transparency and try to always respect the strain and sacrifice that people were doing. And I always believed in the idea. I always had a genuine belief in it. So I could, with good conscience and convincingly, sit down with someone and say, we're going to get there, man. Just hang on. So that was part of it. I also think individually, when people do things like that, once you start, it's a slippery slope. And there's a phenomenon, I think, that as you commit more and more, it becomes harder and harder. It's like gambling. You've got just your underwear left and your watch, and push back from the table. Don't put the wedding ring on the table. It's hard not to, because you think, one more hand and I'll get it all back. So I think there's a little bit of its own momentum that it carries with it, and people do it for each other.
In the original conception, the Bee Gees and the Beatles weren't staying up late at night wondering whether they were getting plays on Pandora. But there were a lot of unknown bands getting no exposure whatsoever, the record business being what it is. How did they figure into the equation?
Well, they represent the sort of cornerstone of our mission. We have over 100,000 artists on Pandora now, and we play almost every single one every month on the service. And so there's now this large constituency of musicians who have never had radio exposure before, who are getting meaningful spins and meaningful exposure to audiences on Pandora. And I think there's an opportunity now to alter really what it means to be a working musician. So when you graduate college and tell your parents, I want to be in a rock band, instead of saying, oh my God, what are we going to do? That they'll say, that's a good, solid middle-class life you had to have ahead of you. That's a profession. It's not sort of a hobby you'll outgrow. It's actually legit. And I have believed since the days I was in a band, I spent a long time in a van traveling around, that there is this enormous number of fabulously talented musicians that no one knows even exist. And they're like trees falling in a forest. They have bands come and go, and maybe 500 people ever see them play, and they're brilliant, but then they're done. And it's kind of like, it's like lost treasure. And part of our role, I think, is to make sure those people can do it until they grow old.
You've been an evangelist for Pandora. So you've done a lot of town hall presentations. And at the outset, when you realized it was taking off, you discovered that the platform itself was going to satisfy something people were looking for. What were some of the initial encounters that confirmed that?
Yeah, so Ben's referring to one of the things that I've been doing since we launched is I've been going out to meet with listeners. And the first meeting I did was a meetup that I announced on our company blog. I just wrote a note saying I would be in New York City in this small cafe in Midtown with a Pandora hat on at like 7 o'clock at night. That's probably not very wise to do, but 2 people showed up. We were a few months into the service, and we had this fantastic conversation around a little coffee table. And they had all sorts of ideas and comments, and it was really exciting. And I just kept doing it. And we developed that program, and the last one I did in New York, there were 1,000 people that came to it. And it was held in a bookstore that held about 350 people. So it was packed to the rafters, and there was literally a line down the block and around the corner of people just waiting to come in. And these town halls, I've probably done, 500 or 600 at this point, are they're just a conversation where I talk about the company and the music genome and sort of who we are, why we do this, and where we hope it's going to go. And then we just let people talk and ask questions, et cetera. And it's a spiritual experience. Because I think all of us, to a person, I'll bet, has a similar connection to music. We like different kinds, but for all of us, music is a very deeply personal, passion-filled thing for us. And what Pandora does is connect people to it. And so it often happens where I'll be in a town hall and someone will just stand up and give like a personal testimonial about a musical experience they've had on Pandora. They just come to say that, I had a fellow who, someone wrote ahead of time to a town hall asking if we could reserve a front row seat for him, and because they tend to fill up now. And near the end of this town hall, he got up and raised his hand. And he said, "I'm the guy who asked you if I could sit in the front row, and I did that because I'm deaf and I needed to be close enough to read your lips." And he said that he had lost his hearing 6 or 7 years earlier to some medical condition, and that he was there to sort of thank me for bringing music back into his life. And he said that the way he used Pandora was he would launch a station, and then when the song came across the screen, he would quickly find the lyrics. This is before we had lyrics actually in Pandora. And then he would put his hands on the speakers and read the lyrics, and the music would come back into his body. And so he's giving this, I have this big lump in my throat as I've listened to him talk, and this very personal thing in a crowd of, there were probably 400 people there. And what I remember very distinctly about that, aside from just how extraordinary it was to hear him speak, was the whole room was right there with him. Like there was they were not all deaf. They couldn't all relate to his particular story itself, but there was a commonality in that room, and that room had young and old, all creeds and colors. Business people, punks, Rastafaris. It was a huge collection of people, but they all clearly shared something in common. And it's kind of like when you go to a great wedding, and there's this huge diversity of people, and like everybody's in love with each other because it's just a great moment. And music, I think, has that power.
I'm not sure people feel as grateful to Jeff Bezos for the Amazon suggestions. If you make the mistake of buying a cookbook, you're bombarded insistently. "Hi, culinary fan, have we got a cookbook for you?" And I think, no, really, my tastes are more eclectic. This afternoon, classical music is what I love most. So I was asking for Alfred Schnittke. I wouldn't think you got a lot of requests for his music, but I was absolutely fascinated by the sequences that followed. And I listened for about an hour. It started out with Schnittke, it ended with Schnittke, and in between it took me to places that I would never have gone on my own. And yet, I looked for the connections, and often I could detect some of them. So I mean, it's really quite fascinating how effective the genome is. It really analyzes things in a very subtle way. But a crucial decision you made once you had this platform must have been to go to internet radio. How did you decide that was the delivery system that was going to work for you, as opposed to
Well, we had tried a lot of things over those years, none of which had worked. We had been in the kiosk business. We had been a provider of recommendation technology. We had really experimented just trying to survive. And I think that combination of things, radio represents 80% of the time people spend listening to music, so it is the pipeline to music. It's, as the radio goes, so goes the industry. Broadband connectivity had really blossomed in those intervening years, so you could stream high-quality audio reliably to more than half of U.S. homes. And then it was kind of, after that, a realization that because our system was a song-based system fundamentally, playlists were a great currency for us to play in. And we had no idea if it would work when we first launched it. But it turns out it was a good idea.
Could you explain the Internet Radio Fairness Act?
Yeah, so one of the struggles we have as a business is we pay an enormous amount in royalties, which on the one hand I think is fantastic because that money goes to musicians. It so happens that internet radio is subject to a radically higher royalty standard than any other form of radio. And so we've been kind of trying to find a way to sort of alleviate some of that disparity. We pay north of 50%, close to 60% of our overall revenue in performance fees to actual performers. AM/FM doesn't pay anything to performers. They pay it to composers, but a performing artist doesn't get anything. You often hear, all these great Motown artists that are all over the radio, but are paupers in real life because they're not compensated for it. I think it's a crime. I mean, in order to solve that, we have to go to Washington because we are subject to, we operate under a statutory, piece of federal legislation. So I spent a lot of time in Congress, meeting with members and trying to sort of educate them on this. And we introduced a bill last year whose design was to create a greater degree of parity. And it became a big, maelstrom, a PR maelstrom.
Okay, so here you were at the beginning, a starving musician with starving colleagues. You were working to perfect this platform. You yourself have been a musician. Part of your incentive is to provide a mode of distribution for performing artists who otherwise don't get one. Yeah. But you achieve colossal success. And suddenly the poor idealist becomes the successful capitalist. And word gets around, I read, it's probably greater than this, but I read the revenues last year were 138 million. It was a big number in any case.
Yeah, it was a lot more than that.
And so, I thought it must be. Yeah, so some of the artists who get 1,000 plays, 1,000 hits on Pandora, and who don't think about the fact that one play on radio, if it's a coast-to-coast station, may in fact be heard by 50,000 people. They're getting maybe a wider exposure for that one play, but they're not getting any money at all. But they look at these numbers and they say of you, and they have, he used to be one of us, now he's one of them. Right? And so there's all this controversy about whether you're ripping them off, whether you're making a fortune out of their sweat, blood, tears. How do you deal with the irony of the situation you're in? How do you make the transition? How do you reconcile the idealism that you started out with the realities of capitalism that you're negotiating now?
Yeah, well, it's not a pleasant thing to go through, for sure. I take sort of greatest comfort and confidence, and solace is the wrong word, but in the knowledge that I know what our true north is, and I know that the ambition of Pandora and where we wind up eventually is there will be a recognition that we are providing all these benefits that have very real value. And those will be increasingly realized as we're able to invest in technology and products and features that allow musicians to actually harness what's happening on Pandora to further their careers. To give you a quick example, Pandora for a while now has been providing on an ad hoc basis heat maps to musicians. So literally a map of the US that shows where people are that have thumbed up their music. And so you can get a sense of where you should drive your tour van, basically. It's a relatively small technical step to go from there to giving a musician the ability to do something like they're on the road, on their iPhone, log into Pandora, zoom into the DMA they're in, with a click of a button, pop up the number of people in that area that have thumbed up their music or thumbed up a band like it, and send them a little audio announcement saying we're playing a gig next Thursday within driving distance of your house. And having been in a van myself for a long time, I think the potential that it's a revolution. I really think when that happens, and it will happen, I don't think people even remember what it was like before. You know, they'll think, wait, you used to put posters on telephone poles? Like, that's literally what we did. So we will get there. And I think when that happens, people will look back and say, oh, God, that was a bunch of nonsense going on back then. In the meantime, though, this experience to go through this has been a very, it's like almost it's a philosophical experience, you know, because you're right, yes, I've become very wealthy, but nothing has changed about the mission I have for the company and the way I want this company to operate as a corporate citizen and how I want it to divide its spoils. But it is very easy in the world of PR to get characterized by sound bites. And I have had very direct conversations with people where I look at them and say, I was you, 20 years ago. I would have said the same things you're saying to me right now, but you just don't have the perspective yet. I don't mean that in a patronizing way. And I think that one of the great challenges of capitalist enterprises is to pursue that, which generates lots of good things, original ideas and new markets and new capacity for people, but not to slide off into a place where it's a selfish endeavor or where it's perceived as such. And as much as the life of a musician is tough, a business entrepreneurship is tough too. We've been through some stuff ourselves, and I've been at this just 14 years, but it started when I was 6 years old and began practicing piano. And there has to be a recognition, and I think this is one of the things that music struggles with, that within the music ecosystem, there are many parts to it. The music is one, and it's central. But it is not the only exalted part. They are all, there is a synergy among them. And there's a tendency to think that music is exalted and the rest is profane. And I think that's misguided and creates this very unhealthy dynamic. So
you mentioned philosophy, and you just mentioned the musical ecosystem. And I noted in an interview that I found on the internet, somebody asked you about philosophy, and you cited John Rawls' Veil of Ignorance. And I'm sure everyone in the room remembers John Rawls' philosophy, but the Veil of Ignorance poses the notion that before being born, as a kind of undifferentiated homunculus, not knowing what your conditions will be when you're born, what your genetic inheritance, what your economic circumstances at birth, you get to determine the rules that will prevail in the world into which you're born. And I'm kind of curious if I were to ask you to apply the veil of ignorance to the music industry, how would you change it? Because it sounds as if Pandora is in effect an effort to change some of the frustrating aspects of that ecosystem that you encountered at the outset.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge believer in this idea of the veil of ignorance as a guiding principle for, you know, how you set up societies. And in a way, you could say that one way to characterize that debate is how much should a capitalist make, you know? Because if they make too much, then it's clear where you want to be before you know what you're going to be. But there's a medium, there's a golden mean in there, where the risk and pain and uncertainty of all the things you do as an entrepreneur and the gains you have on the other end feel equal to being an artist and trying that route. It would be, I think, a wonderful society if we could get to that. So I'm a believer.
We've talked a lot about education at this conference, and we recognize that finding gainful employment, training people so that they themselves can secure a job, can support a family, can do all of the things that one wants to do that few musicians early in their careers can do. And we've given somewhat short shrift, not just to the liberal arts, but especially to the arts. What is the role of the arts in addressing the wider social problems? Is it just a frivolous indulgence, or is it something more central and important to a good society?
Yeah, I think it's utterly fundamental. I think that ubiquitous pursuit of the arts is a cornerstone of a civilized and caring society. And, you know, when I was a musician, so before I founded Pandora, I was well into my 30s. I was penniless, you know. Literally, I had $100 in my bank account. And I had wrestled for 15 years with this, you know, what am I doing, where am I going? And as you get older and older, it's less cute, you know, that you're this, like, young, well, not so young anymore musician, you know, and I found, you know, over those years, that was one of the great, you know, sort of mental struggles to stay with that in the face of, you know, feeling more and more like an outcast. And society ought not to make someone who does that feel like an outcast, no matter how, you know, how poor they are, or how few people are listening to their music. The very fact that they're choosing to make music is, I think, great. And I personally, you know, when I walk around and I see someone on the corner, you know, playing their guitar with a hat out, I always think that's just one of the best things, to have someone there and they're just making music, you know. And can there be too much of that? I don't think so, you know. So
where do you think Pandora's going? Where do you think the musical ecosystem is going? And where do you think the arts are going in our society?
Well, I can speak for music. It's hard to, I know that we'll have someone talk about film right after this, which will be intriguing. But the vision I have for music eventually is Pandora will be a big part of it. But I imagine us having billions and billions of listeners all over the world listening to Pandora, listening to music from their own cultures, but also through the genome, meandering across geographic boundaries into stuff they'd never heard before, and connecting, you know, with music from across the world. It's amazing to me how little, the US is particularly guilty of this, how little sort of cross-fertilization there is across continent for music. But that in turn also, musicians are connected to that audience globally as well. And really, I would like for there to come a time when the day your song gets added to Pandora, that's it, man. Quit the job, get the band together, and go. Because you will could have flowed into this enormous audience immediately of people who are interested in your kind of music. And they may be spread all over the globe, but they'll be accessible on your smartphone. And that will lead to sort of a new generation of you know, musicians doing that for a living.
In addition to making Pandora, do you still make music?
Well, thanks to the Crown Fellowship, I've gotten back into it. I made a promise to you guys, to Peter, Skip, and Ben to do that. Yeah, I am. I have a little baby girl too, who's taken a lot of my time in the last few years. Yeah, for me, the next episode of my life after this is fully, immersing myself in music again.
Somebody asked you what movie part you'd most like to play, and you said Iron Man. Why?
I hate that questions like that they gave me. I couldn't think of a better answer.
There was some kind of verbal genome going on in your head, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I wanted to fly in that suit. That was.
So we have just a little less than 10 minutes to take some questions from the audience. So if you'd like to ask a question, I see a hand here. If someone can get you a microphone. There's a microphone here. It's coming towards you now.
There's one back there too.
And there's another back over here, please.
It was interesting to hear your discussion of handing out paychecks after 2.5 years. In the sense of leadership, could you talk about your discussions with your institutional investors to persuade them that handing out the money that they're just putting into your company was the right thing to do?
Yeah, that wasn't their preference, to give that all away. That was essentially a promise I made to the team, which is if we raise money above a certain amount of money, you're going to get made whole. And I would not have broken that for the world, It would have I would have regretted that for the rest of my life. And my pitch to the investors was, you're investing in the tenacity of this team. You're investing in the idea of the genome, but second to that is the tenacity of this team. And if you want that, honor what they've done to date by making this big gesture of paying people back. And there were two guys. Larry Marcus was the lead investor from Walden, and his partner, Art Berliner, who we had this discussion, and it was pretty quick. And they said, you know what? All right, we'll do it. And it just felt like the right thing to do, and we never gave it a second thought.
Thank you. Another question back here. Bravo.
Hi, I'm Aurelia Garrido from Costa Rica. My leadership project for the last 7 years has been developing talent and opportunities in the film industry in Costa Rica. We've had some success, and now we're expanding to other arts, including music. We have the hope that in small markets as Central Americans, where we don't have a music industry, all the changes that are happening could open doors for our musicians, because we want to develop talent, but also to give them opportunities to make a living, and hopefully a good living from it. What ideas would you have for these artists in small developing countries?
Boy, well, we're trying to get Pandora licensed outside the US. We play plenty of Costa Rican music to people living in the US, but we don't get to play anything to Costa Ricans in their own country because of licensing constraints, which I think debilitate this industry, that licensing is so hard to get done. So lobby your government to get Pandora over to Costa Rica. That's one suggestion. But gosh, that's a hard question.
Isn't their appearance on Pandora a potential source of revenue for them as they build audiences?
Yeah,
in this country?
they will be drawing revenue and exposure in the U.S. And we do everything we can to make that happen. In terms of what to do domestically with local artists, I'm a big believer that artists need communities. I mentioned this stress you feel at being an outcast. I think being surrounded by like-minded people and folks who believe and support what you do is really important. And so I think that sort of artistic or musician homes are important, you know, whether institutes, sort of recording facilities, schools, et cetera, that can be long-term homes for musicians would be a great system to develop. You know, like, you know, LC Stemma is this sort of beacon, which I think, in addition to kind of having generated this enormous number of musicians, has legitimized the very act of playing music. And you've got kids who are 4 or 5 years old who are playing violin. And because of the impact of that program, I think other kids look at them in a way that respects what they're doing. That, to me, is one of the most fundamental dynamics to try to impact. I mean, that program is extraordinary.
Thank you. Is there another question? I see a hand here in the back.
Thank you. One dying question, having grown up in the radio business. Mm-hmm. What do you think terrestrial radio looks like 5 years from now?
I think terrestrial radio will continue to consolidate. I think there will be more and more, you know, fewer owners, fewer stations playing a more and more homogenized selection of songs, because that's a natural sort of economic rhythm of that industry. Over time, radio stations that experiment or play to a more diverse audience or sort of stray from the kind of main pop pipeline struggle to survive. So I think it'll consolidate more. I think that the folks there will be great curation will thrive. You know, there are just DJs who know how to do it, and they seem to flourish and retain their audiences in spite of all these other options. So it will reward people who can really build sort of fantastic playlists. But I think it's definitely going to experience a lot of compression as an industry, not just from us, but, you know, satellite radio, all these other alternatives.
What new developments do you foresee in Pandora? I mean, Pandora has evolved in all sorts of intriguing ways. What's coming up next?
To me, the most exciting piece is the artist piece. We call it Pandora for Artists, and it's this whole dashboard that an artist can access and sort of have to develop their careers. That's the one I'm really most passionate about. Another area for us that is exciting is cars. We've done a lot of work to get Pandora embedded into cars. Right now, we do it through a smartphone. Over time, it'll be, you know, internet-enabled cars will literally be like a rolling computer, so Pandora will just be on it for you. But, you know, one of the most powerful moments I had for Pandora early on was the first time I listened to it in a car. And it had been on smartphones for a while, and I had heard about people using it, which they could do by just using a $2 adapter and plugging an iPhone or an Android into their aux jack on the dashboard. So I knew about it and I'd heard about it, but I hadn't experienced it myself. And I really remember to this day, say it had been our 6 or 8 months, I share a car with my wife, so I don't drive a whole lot. And I got in the car, started the station, plugged it in, and then sat back and went driving down the road. And I think it was a Norah Jones station I launched or something. 15 or 20 minutes later, I was driving along and I thought to myself, man, this radio station is just nailing it for me, you know? And I had forgotten I was listening to Pandora, and it was a bit of a cognitive dissonance, you know. I drive with one hand because I'm skipping stations constantly with my right hand, and I get a song I love, I'm like, yeah, you know, there's a song I love. And then I got another song I love, and then another song, you know, and it was like, what's going on here, you know? And I was in a car, and it was radio. So it wasn't my MP3 collection. I didn't know what was coming next. It felt and sounded like radio coming out of my car speakers, you know. That's the car experience, but by golly, you know, it was playing what I loved. And that was a bit of an epiphany for me, that moment. Like, wow, this could really change the whole game. Yeah.
Tim Westergren, son of the winter solstice, I want to thank you for Pandora. I would have traveled across the world to have this conversation with you. Bravo. And now it's my pleasure to introduce another Crown Fellow, Tiffany Shlain, who's going to be addressing you on cloud filmmaking, making free collaborative films for nonprofits on a global scale. Tiffany Shlain.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. I'm going to teach you a Yiddish word because it fits. It's called heimisha. Can you guys all say that? Heimisha. And what it means is the way I feel in Aspen, which is like a lot of you have known for a long time, a lot of you I just met, but it's like it feels like family, and it's like I'm so grateful to Peter, Eric, Keith. Where's everyone? In the audience, Ben. And I'm just so grateful to come here so often in my life. And actually what I get to talk to you about is really a project that started as a hunch here at Aspen. And I call it cloud filmmaking. So first, one of the interesting things about, how many of you know who William Gibson is, the sci-fi writer? He wrote Snow Crash and various things. So he said, good, when William Gibson. So he said, if you want to see where technology is headed, just look at what the artists and the criminals are doing. So tonight you're going to hear from an artist who's really into technology, and I'm really interested in experimenting with how we can use technology in new ways. So I'll give you, before I kind of launch into how I got to cloud filmmaking, what I'm doing, I'm going to show you a cloud film. So first, I am going to ask what I ask people all over the world to do. I would like you to all close your eyes and put your hand on your heart, and I want you to really feel your heartbeat. And I want you to think about what your heartbeat means to you. So that's pretty much what I did in an email and a tweet and a Facebook post. And I just asked people to film themselves thinking about what the heartbeat meant. And this is one of my cloud films.
Pon la mano en tu corazón.
Hand on your heart. You feel it?
That's your life clock. Someday, it's gonna stop. A lot of things are gonna happen in the world between now and then. So what are you gonna do while you're here? Stand on the sidelines? Or are you gonna be part of something bigger? So if you were in my session today when we were reading the Teddy Roosevelt piece, I was like, oh my God, that was what I was trying to do in the movie. Try to get people to engage. And what's been really exciting is that, you know, I can make that energy happen. And I feel like because people sent that into us from all over the world, like their energy was in that film. They filmed themselves. Sometimes we filmed them at Aspen, which was very fun to see them in there. But, And then we've been able to make them for nonprofits, and I get to redirect that emotion and that energy for nonprofits. So now I'm going to back up a little bit, because there are principles that my film studio, I have a film studio in San Francisco, we have these on our wall. These are our principles that guide us in cloud. We call it, a lot of people say crowdsourcing, which I really don't. I'm short, and I don't like crowds. Like, that word kind of makes me nervous. But I like the word cloud because it's so open and there's so much potential. So you could say this is a crowdsourced film, but I like to call it a cloud-sourced film. So the principles of cloud filmmaking is that we make it collaboratively with people from all over the world, that we create films about ideas that speak to the most universal qualities that connect us as humans. There's so many things in media about what divide us. I mean, I can barely watch TV. I think there needs to be put more into the network that is about what connects us. The other part of this is to give back as much as we receive. So we make these customized films. People are sending us beautiful artwork and films, and we make these films. And then to use the cloud to translate into as many languages as possible, because there's so much potential with that. And with every one of these cloud films that we make, whatever new technology is out, I mean, you should see us at we just changed the name of our film studio to Film Studio in Lab, because we're any new technology, we're how can we use this to make a film with people, or how can people create with us, or how can we engage people with this? So we're like kids in a candy store right now, because every couple of months, tech companies are we're trying this out, Tiffany, and we're yes, we could do something with that. So we're always trying to push the boundaries of what we can do with technology. And I think my whole career, I've been really interested in technology. I think cloud filmmaking in a lot of ways combines my love of tech and filmmaking. And just to give you a little bit of my background, these were my favorite films growing up. My family's Jewish. This was kind of our temple, going to the movies every Sunday night. We talked about a lot of ideas from old men with beards like Coppola and Lucas, and every Sunday night, without fail, we went to see a movie, and we discussed it afterwards. And I think about these Crown readings, the Aspen readings, that's how we used films. We would see a film, and my family would use it as a way to discuss morals, what happened in the movie. It was such a trigger for this deep conversation my family had every week. So I loved film. I've always loved films as a way to trigger conversation. Now, I was supposed to be a surgeon, not a filmmaker. My father bought me the book, The Making of a Woman Surgeon, on 4 separate occasions. I was the one who was supposed to be a doctor. And so that wasn't really an option to be a filmmaker. But another event happened when I was a teenager. My parents were going through a horrible divorce, and I was given a Macintosh, which teenagers' years suck anyways. I was going through a particularly hard time, and that computer was like a link to another world to me. Now this is before the web. Can you guys all remember that? I'd go to the library, and I would remember that sound? And I would connect to other libraries in other parts of the world, and I loved it. And so I'm just going to kind of fast through my career. I founded the Webby Awards. I first was shown the web in the 90s, and I was like, this is going to change the world, and I want to honor innovators in that space. And I was in my 20s, and being in San Francisco in your 20s in the 90s during the first internet boom was like crazy sauce. I mean, it was like how I imagined the 60s in San Francisco, but it wasn't like free love. It was like free internet. And everyone was like, you're under 30, you're on the cover of every magazine, and this is where it's at, and you're going to change the world. And but I was so excited as as a communication vehicle. I never was motivated by money. And so I was doing the Webby Awards. And again, I always made a lot of films about technology. That's a film from one of the Webbies that would introduce the show. So then 9/11 happened, which I think we can all agree. Everyone did soul searching on their lives. And Bush was in office. One of the first things he did was he cut off funding for international family planning. I told you my family are doctors. I heard many stories growing up about women who had unsafe abortions, and my father would save their life and all these things. And so it really pissed me off that Bush did that. And it was like I was thinking about that call, the Martin Luther King, your call. So first time I had done very well in my career, and I was doing the Webby Awards, and I went to Planned Parenthood, and I said, I make all these films for the Webbies, and I want to make a film for Planned Parenthood that engages my generation in reproductive choice. And they were like, great, we need it. There was an election coming up, and so I made this, and I said, and it's going to be funny. They're like, you're going to make a funny film about reproductive choice? And I'm like, yeah, we need to make people laugh. They're too tense about this issue. So I made this film. I was doing the Webbies. I made Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. And it got into Sundance, and it helped all the Planned Parenthoods. They used it for their 30-year anniversary of Roe v. Wade. And I only spent like 3 months on that movie. And meanwhile, for the Webby Awards, I had this huge staff. I would work crazy hours. And every year, I'd have to duplicate my efforts. And I was really thinking a lot about, I wanted to have kids. I was working like 90-hour weeks. And my husband and I mean, how many women in the room struggle with how do I make an impact and how do I be a good mom at home? I was really struggling with that. And I saw, wow, I made this film and it still plays to this day. I mean, how many years later then it doesn't need me anymore and it has all my creative energy in the film and I can help this issue I care about. Now, the one thing that was interesting was Planned Parenthood was very possessive of the film. Like if another reproductive rights organization wanted to use it, they're like, there's a lot of inner politics in every cause and issue, as we all know. And I was like, oh, I don't like that. I want this film to be used for everyone that's involved in this issue. So I tell that story because really these films, so I wanted to think about how could I have more impact and how could I scale? And then I got pregnant. I sold the Webby Awards to a company in New York, but I still care. I still have equity. It still exists, and I'm happy about that. And that was a whole interesting process. I started my Henry Crown Fellowship. I started the Moxie Institute film studio, which was going to be a film studio that used film with technology, basically film plus web to make social change. And Aspen was so instrumental. I mean, as you're watching this next series of films, they're so Aspen Institute. I mean, just know that I was doing the readings as I was starting my film studio. So I think they worked their way into everything, which is kind of interesting to be here now to do it. So the first thing I was really interested in was connectedness. I was interested in how technology, it's showing us how connected that we innately already are. So I wanted to explore connectedness biologically, technologically, mathematically, politically. We're so interdependent. I wanted to explore that. So I asked my father, who was also a wonderful writer, to write the film with me. And right before I was making the film, he got diagnosed with brain cancer. And I realized I was making a film about connectedness on a very intellectual level, and I wasn't dealing with emotional connectedness. So I tore apart the movie, and it turned into, how many of you saw it I played it at Act 2. Okay, I'll show a little trailer for those of you that didn't see it, but one of the other things you should know is all of my films that my film studio make, we look at them as movable feasts. The film is the appetizer, and the discussion you have afterwards is the main course. We make lots of tools that go with the film, so we have discussion cards and a curriculum and a book, and to us the film's just the trigger for you to do a deep dive on how you feel about that issue. So I'm going to show you just the trailer for that now.
So I'm at lunch with this really good friend of mine, and we are having a fantastic time. I haven't seen her in years. We're laughing, drinking, talking, but I'm still getting this urge to check my email. And I was like, Tiffany, stay focused. You traveled all the way across the United States to see her. Stay focused. But eventually it was like, it overtook me. And then I faked needing to go to the bathroom. So I excused myself, grab my phone, go into the bathroom stall, kind of hiding, texting, emailing, thinking, what if I become? I can't be the only one sneaking to the bathroom to check my email. Technology is clearly changing us, and the way we connect with our friends, our families, and the world around us. So I set out to make a film about what it means to be connected in the 21st century. Things are changing. There's so much more to think about, and that pace of change is only accelerating. How much faster can it go before we can't keep up? This was the kind of question I was exploring in this film. And then I had this year that turned my world upside down and forced me to rethink everything I thought I understood about the ways we're connected. as humans have accumulated so much knowledge, why do we have such a hard time seeing the bigger picture? For centuries, we've been declaring independence, and perhaps it's time to finally declare our interdependence.
So that was my feature film that was in theaters a couple years ago. And I was actually at the Aspen Institute showing like I was on a panel about arts funding. And the other two people on the panel were artists, and they were saying there's no funding. There's no funding for artists. And I was like, the world is abundant. You just need to, it's like a perspective shift. If you think that there's good funding out there, it will come to you. And with like that, it was like magic. From the audience at the Aspen Institute, a woman came up to me and said, I want to fund a really bold idea of yours. Do you have any bold ideas? And I was like, I've got a Henry Crown project. I was like, you know, how many, like, there'd been a project that had been kind of brewing. And so I had a hunch. And this harkened back to that film I made for Reproductive Choice, which at that point was years back. I was like, I want to put the ideas from Connected into action. So, you know, the climax of Connected is like, what's the potential when there's 7 billion people online? What is that? I immediately think, what can we make together? What can we make together about what connects us? So I told her this idea, and I said, I want to make it collaboratively. I don't know if it's going to work, and then I want to make it for nonprofits. And she said she normally is an anonymous, their foundation is an anonymous funder, which in the Jewish tradition, the philosopher Maimonides, it's the highest form of giving to be anonymous. And I love that they have been anonymous. But when I told her I was speaking tonight, she said, I want you to tell them who I am and who we are. So it's the Bezos Family Foundation. And they've been so beautifully supportive, I know, of Aspen and of this hunch. And it really was just a hunch. It was an experiment. So after studying the Declaration of Independence in my Crown program at length, in many different directions, I decided to rewrite the Declaration of Interdependence with my husband, who's a professor at Berkeley, and we co-write a lot of movies together. And I think it was from studying those texts so carefully that I kind of was able to play with them also. So we posted that on the internet, and we just said, if this speaks to you, will you read it on camera? And we did it on 4th of July, which is kind of bold. And we put it out in a tweet and a Facebook post and an email. And we asked for artwork. If any of the words inspire you, please send us artwork. We got entries from every part of the world. We would cry. Like at my office, anyways, you'll see the 4-minute film that came from that.
But in the course of human events,
在人类活动的过程中
In the course of human events,
عندما نكون في مضمار الأحداث البشرية,
quand dans le cours des événements humains,
becomes increasingly necessary
para reconocer
to recognize the fundamental qualities
that connect us.
that connect us.
That connect us.
The truths we hold
To be self-evident.
Alors nous devons réévaluer les vérités que nous tenons pour acquises.
That all humans are
created equal.
And all are connected.
比如每个人都是生来平等，并且联系在一起的。
That we share the pursuits of life,
La recherche d'une vie meilleure.
Liberty, الخيروت,
Happiness.
البهجان,
والغذاء.
Water.
agua,
shelter,
el refugio,
seguridad,
education,
pendidikan,
justice,
and hopes for a better future.
that our collective knowledge, economy,
Technology and environment
are fundamentally interdependent.
Ketergantungan kita.
That what will propel us forward
لأن لدينا شجاعة على التقدير.
is our curiosity.
Curiosity, rasa ingin tahu kita.
Our ability to forgive, kemampuan kita untuk memaafkan,
our ability to appreciate,
Our courage, keberanian kita.
And our desire to connect.
That we're connected.
quality.
That these things we share
في نهاية المطاف إلا تطور.
To our fullest common potential.
le cose che noi teniamo insieme sono le cose del nostro mondo.
我们应该严肃对待我们的问题。
We should never take ourselves too seriously.
Kwa sababu jambo jingine linalotuunganisha
huwa qudratuna ala tahammul. Dan upaya kita untuk belajar dari kesalahan kita.
So that we can learn from the past.
Understand our place in the world.
memahami tempat kita di dunia.
Use our collective knowledge.
To create a better future.
去创造一个更美好的未来。
So perhaps it's time
Jadi mungkin sudah saatnya kita
That we, as a species,
sebagai spesies, as a species,
You love to laugh.
que disfruta de reír.
love to laugh,
Poser question,
ask questions, and connect.
Do something radical and true. For centuries,
We have declared
independence.
Perhaps it's now time.
That we, as humans, declare our interdependence.
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 Interdépendance.
That was very powerful to watch it here for me. Got like choked up again. So that was experiment number one. We were so excited by the response. I can't even describe to you what it felt like to just, it was like a call and response. I mean, I've directed movies with like hundreds of people on the set, but it was like, I was directing from like my little office in San Francisco and just putting out a call for collaboration. And the next part of the experiment was I wanted to invite people to help me translate it. So it premiered actually on Interdependence Day, which is the day after 9/11. And I was at the 10-year anniversary of 9/11. And then YouTube actually featured it on their homepage. And we did a call for translation. We did not know what we would expect. And in 6 weeks, it was translated into 65 languages by volunteer translators. You have to understand, I've had films that have played at 100 film festivals over like 7-year period. Maybe it got translated into 5 languages. And if you think about ideas, like setting ideas free, the fact that it's in 65 languages, I mean, it just kind of blew our minds. So then this was the last part of the experiment that I was super interested in. Could I put a call out? I mean, I was trying to solve a problem. So many nonprofits do the important work of the world. And have you ever been to one of their dinners and then they show a film and it just doesn't match the quality of what they're doing? Or they don't have any film. And I'm like, gosh, they're doing the work. They've got skin in the game and they don't have anything to get it further. So what if I make a film that's so high level, anyone could change, we could change the ending for them. We could change the call for action, right, the action form. So I'm going to show you, you just saw the master version, and then this is what an example of. So basically, we work with them on how to finish the sentence, because surprisingly, that's very difficult. They'll give us a paragraph. So donating, so we worked with them on that call to action. We put their URL and their logo. It's their movie. They show it at their events. They put it on their website. Here's another one. So this is about supporting education. And it's so easy for us. I mean, we do spend a lot of time working with the nonprofit on the call to action, but it's this beautiful, simple, scalable model that I could suddenly help a lot more people without too much more of my team's time. So in just a year, I think we've made like 150 versions of this movie on every continent. It's being used, and it feels so good. So we decided we want to touch upon everything that connects us. We want to touch upon generosity, gratitude, wisdom, courage, everything that would touch upon it. So the next topic, I'm very interested in the brain, my upbringing around my mom's a psychologist. She was always talking about the brain from an emotional level. My dad did surgery on the brain. And so I was given this really exciting research from Harvard and the University of Washington that not a lot of people realize about how to best nurture a child's brain from birth to 5. So we thought that's universal. Everyone wants to nurture their child's brain in the best way possible. How can we get this out to every country in the world? So that was the topic of our next film. And I am going to show that to you. This one is actually, so, we're asking people. So I thought, I want to ask more. I want to see what works. Now, sometimes I tell you, I've asked for something and no response. It's almost like you're experimenting. You're like, what's going to work? What's not going to work? So the thing that we asked for this one is we asked, those of you that have little children, there's probably nothing more beautiful than watching your child run into your arms. So we asked people to hold their cell phone and have their child just run into their arms. So notice that, because it was very fun for us to see how that would work. So here's brain power.
A lot of us are wondering, what is all this technology doing to our brains? I mean, we know that the brain changes throughout life based on experiences. In fact, watching this movie is reshaping connections in your brain right now.
But since we humans are the ones creating and using this technology, maybe a better question to ask is, how are we shaping our brains? There's so much about the brain that we don't know. But there are some things we do know. You see, not long after we humans began thinking, we began thinking about ways to understand our own brains. One strategy thinkers have used throughout history is to compare the brain to the newest technology of their day. The brain is a clock, a switchboard, a steam engine, a machine, a computer. And we wondered, how can today's technology help us understand the brain in a new way? So we used that technology to ask people all over the world, how do you imagine the brain? It was amazing, like all these neurons firing ideas and images back to us from all over the world. And it was very clear. The internet, the most advanced technological system in the world, is such a strong framework to help understand the human brain, the most advanced biological system in the world. But then we thought about it a bit more. And since the internet is in such a young developmental stage, rapidly growing, constantly changing, forming billions of new connections all over the world, then maybe a stronger framework would be to compare it to a child's brain, which is in a similar stage of development, rapidly growing, constantly changing, and making billions upon billions of connections between different parts of the brain. So here's the question. If we say that the internet is in a similar developmental stage as a child's brain, then what can we learn by comparing them? Let's start with size. Obviously, the internet seems like a larger entity than a child's brain. But what does that mean in terms of our analogy? We could say that a neuron in the brain would be like a web page in the internet. So let's look at the number of neurons in a child's brain compared to the number of web pages on the internet. Well, a human at any age has about 100 billion neurons in the brain. But the internet has 10 times that, 1 trillion web pages. So with this analogy, the internet is bigger. So then, which of these networks is more complex? We could say a synapse in the brain, the connection point between two neurons, is like a hyperlink, the connection point between two web pages. So are there more connections in a child's brain or on the internet? Well, the internet has over 100 trillion links. And an adult's brain has 300 trillion links. But get this, a child's brain has a quadrillion connections, 10 times the number of connections of the entire internet. A child's brain has more connections than the entire internet. Yes, it blew our minds too. How is that even possible? Let's break it down. As we said, a baby is born with 100 billion neurons. But those quadrillion connections, they're not there yet. Those connections form at a very rapid speed during the first 5 years of life, at 700 to 1,000 new synapses per second. Those connections are created through every interaction a child has and are important because they form the architecture of the brain. So every time you talk to and engage with a child, you are literally growing a brain, connecting the different parts of the brain, which allows for new ideas, insights, and creative thinking. So each moment of eye contact, each new word exchanged, each time you make a child laugh, you are strengthening these connections. And since there are so many different ways to do this, we asked people around the world, send us videos of your favorite ways to engage with the children in your life. During these early years, a child's brain makes as many connections as possible. And then it begins pruning the ones that aren't used and strengthening the ones that are. A dynamic process that continues throughout life. But since a child's brain is activated by everything it encounters, it can also be overwhelmed, which causes stress. When the brain experiences stress, the body's alarm system is activated. If the stress is relieved quickly, the system easily returns to normal. And while learning to deal with stress is an important part of development, severe situations such as ongoing abuse or neglect, where there is no caring adult to relieve the stress, leaves the body's alarm system activated, which can have serious lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Toxic stress can lead to a body system set permanently on high alert. It causes the synapses we use for learning and self-control to be pruned, while connections for fear and rash behavior get stronger. While the brain can change throughout the rest of life, these early years are fundamental in building a strong foundation for curiosity, creativity, and adaptability. And if we say that the internet is in the same critical stage of early development, making as many connections as possible, we also need to be mindful of how we're building its foundation. Just like every interaction creates new connections in a child's brain, every email, tweet, search, or post is creating and strengthening connections in our global brain, literally changing the shape of the internet that we as billions of people all over the world are developing together. And just as it's key for all the different parts of a child's brain to be connected to set the stage for the most insightful and creative thoughts, it's key that all the different parts of the world are connected to lay the foundation for worldwide empathy, innovation, and human expression. And while we don't know all the ways technology is reshaping our brains yet, we do know that every time we plug in, every person we follow, email, or link to, we know it's affecting us. So we need to be mindful of what we let into our brains, always. Which sometimes means knowing when to disconnect. Just as it's not good for a child's brain to be constantly over or understimulated, it's not good for an adult's brain either. For both the internet and a child's brain, the connections we pay most attention to will be strengthened, while the ones we use less will be pruned. So how do we nurture both of these growing, interconnected networks to set a course for a better future? By paying attention to what we are paying attention to. Attention is the mind's most valuable resource. Every interaction counts. We all have the opportunity to shape the future of the world, and our future starts here.
And we've been able to make this film for child development programs, policy, educators, scientists, schools, preschools, for childcare. It's been so interesting, the different people that are using, that we're making free customized versions for. And then I was asked to write a book by Ted. I had so much research for this movie, and it kind of was a reverse thing where I made a film and then did a book from the film. And the US State Department is sending me to the Middle East with this movie this fall. They were going to send me to Egypt and Israel. I think it just got moved to Israel after everything that happened. But they sent me connected to Cape Town, South Africa last year. And I was thinking about when Madeleine Albright was saying how, she's like, we have to use whatever tools necessary. So I guess back after World War II, like they sent Louis Armstrong, they have this program where they send artists, and it's so wonderful. You have all these screenings and discussions, so I'm so excited. I've met a lot of wonderful people from the Middle East, Aspen Leadership Council. I look forward to visiting you very soon with this. So if any of you, I'm about to show you a sneak peek of my new movie, which is a rough cut, which I'm so excited to show you. But if any of you are involved with a nonprofit, any of you, fellows, the public, you can just go to our site and we will make a movie for you for free. It takes just a couple weeks. So I hope you will take me up on it. And the really fun part for us is by showing the nonprofits that they can use the same movie, it actually allows us to show their interdependence. So we have on our site, these are all the different nonprofits. We've made almost, I think we're at 500 nonprofits in just 2 years. And we have this map where we show how they're all connected, and we can't wait to call upon all of them to work together on something. So my pledge to all of you is that I want to make thousands of these movies and just set them free and let them help the nonprofit do their work and engage more people in what they're doing. So, and I also hope you'll maybe participate in a movie, because it's very fun. I often, on Facebook, we're Connected the Film is the name of our Facebook page. We're working on the script late at night. We just ask our community questions, and we get great ideas from them. And I tweet questions for the movie. I also have a newsletter called Breakfast at Tiffany's, where we're always, it's quarterly, and we kind of ask people to engage in experiments with us. And I have a new film series coming out called The Future Starts Here, where I'm talking a lot about technology and a lot of our experiments, making things with people from all over the world. So I was going to show you, I have to show you a 1-minute movie. My film makes a lot of silly films, because humor is really important. And we've been talking a lot about tipping points. Who talked about tipping points in your session yesterday? We're at this tipping point. So this is just a 1.5-minute movie that my husband and I made.
For years, experts have been predicting massive global changes. This trend in tipping points seems to be reaching a tipping point. But while people are worried about the end of civilization, have you noticed that your friend list is accelerating? You have 3 friends in common. You have 15 friends in common. You have 155 friends in common. You have 4,950 friends in common. You have 68,209 friends in common. You have 285,954 friends in common. You have 2,533,136 friends in common. First city where everyone will become friends? Portland, Oregon. Of course. Next will be Seattle, then San Francisco. It spread to Monte Carlo soon after, and the EU is predicted to make nice by January 2016. The trend will accelerate to other countries. There will be some resistance, but who wants to be left out? You have 7 billion friends in common. Scientists are calling this the friendship. The point when everyone on Earth becomes friends. And you thought the singularity was a big deal.
This is what my husband and I do on late nights. Anyways, that's friendship. But okay, I'm about to show you. Thank you. I thought should I show that in the Middle East? Is that too risky? I can show that? I wanted to ask your advice. Okay, so how many of you have seen a rough cut of a movie? No, okay. So what a rough cut means is it's not done. If you're writing a paper, there's still red marks on it. The music is repetitive. There's some typos. Don't call me out on those. Our animator's from Iceland, and so there's quite a few typos. But I'm super excited to show it to you. And let me see. So I said repetitive music. It's not complete. It's like 90% done. But it's so fit our discussion in our panel today. We had a discussion on who was in our afternoon session. There was like, I can't wait for you guys in particular, but it probably dealt with a lot of your readings too. And it is 8 minutes, and I'm going to hopefully enlist you to help me with the launch. So here it is.
There are 7 billion of us humans on the planet, and each one of us has a unique character.
So what determines your character? you do, and all the people around you. And there's new science proving that if you focus on certain parts of your character, that can lead to a more meaningful, successful, and happy life, no matter what your circumstance. I mean, who doesn't want that? We humans have been trying to figure out the key to a happy, meaningful life forever. Then in 2004, 2 psychologists published research about character that gave us a whole new framework to think about ourselves. They suggested that instead of focusing on all the things that can go wrong with us, it's also important to celebrate all the things that can go right. So they looked throughout history and identified 6 core virtues that humans have valued across cultures and across time. And then highlighted 24 character strengths that could lead to these virtues. And they organized them in a way that we could understand them better, like scientists have done throughout history. These groundbreaking studies showed that each of us is a unique combination of these strengths. I'm high on curiosity. I could work a little on the prudence. What is prudence? Anyhow, one of the most interesting parts of all of this, at least for me, is that they found that if people focus on building upon the strengths that they had, it would have a lasting effect on their happiness and well-being. So you can literally shape your character by recognizing your own strengths and celebrating them. So think about it. What are your top 5 strengths? These studies also showed that you can help shape other people's character. That the key to human relationships is ultimately appreciating the character strengths in others. To explore this, we asked people around the world, who do you admire and why?
I admire my mother the most because she's very loving and caring.
Восхищаюсь целеустремленными людьми, которые готовы бороться за свою цель.
The person I admire the most is Einstein, of course.
My sister, because she is so tough and so brave.
People who use their creative energy to make the world a better place.
This powerful new framework paved the way for a whole new era of character research that focuses on ways we can increase the strengths we have and develop the ones we'd like in both ourselves and in others. A new era in social science that, it turns out, is unpacking a very old idea. An important step in building your character is your perspective. One theorist identifies people as having either a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. A fixed mindset is the belief that we're born with certain abilities, intelligence, and talents, and we're stuck with it. A growth mindset is the belief that we can change, that we can develop our character, that we can become better versions of ourselves. Take, for example, failure. With a fixed mindset, failing at something means, I'm a failure, I don't have what it takes. With a growth mindset, failure is part of the process. It's not like it's not hard, but it's something to learn from, something to improve upon. Fortunately, everyone has the ability to develop a growth mindset. It takes practice and encouragement, but it can be learned. Our ability to develop a growth mindset and all of these character strengths is because of an amazing part of the human brain called the prefrontal cortex. It's like our brain's control panel that orchestrates all of our thoughts and actions, what many scientists call executive functions. Or what neuroscientist Adele Diamond, oops, not that Adele, yes, that one, calls self-regulation. This part of the brain is like the self-control and focus filter. It helps keep our impulses and emotions in check. And the way to strengthen that filter is as simple as taking a moment, focusing your attention, and asking yourself, is what I'm about to do a reflection of who I am and who I want to be? Strengthening this filter is important to begin early in life, but it's also important to continue throughout our lives, and can happen through simple everyday activities that keep our attention focused. So while we're all becoming more and more distracted in this age of distraction, we need to remember to take a moment and think.
And here's an exciting new insight. Some people believe there are 7 strengths in particular that can be real game changers, leading to better grades, better jobs, and ultimately a more meaningful life, no matter what your circumstances. Optimism, gratitude, social intelligence, curiosity, self-control, enthusiasm, and perseverance, also known as grit. While there have been many different theories about character throughout history, what scientists in this field agree on is that character matters, and that character strengths can be learned, practiced, and cultivated. So when you think about yourself, what are your strengths?
And how can you find ways to use them more in your work, school, home, and community?
It's like you have these superpowers, and focusing your attention on them makes them stronger. And then if you focus on the people around you and their strengths, it makes them stronger too. As each of us becomes our best versions of ourselves and encourages others to do the same, we can lead to important changes throughout the world. Just imagine a world infused with more humanity, justice, courage, and wisdom. So if you can be a better version of yourself, how do you want to be?
I definitely want to be somebody that other people can feel they can rely on.
A man who was courageous.
Somebody who went for their goals.
As a risk taker.
Kind.
Exactly like my mom. Beautiful, strong, and powerful.
I want people to say that I'm funny.
Who is a nice person.
Como un músico.
Generous.
This video.
Kind.
Accountable.
Incondicional.
Amante música.
Sensible.
Profesional.
Charismática.
I want to become someone who, when the time comes for me to die, I go, oh my goodness, I have used it up. I have wrung it dry.
Everybody is a star. They just need to learn how to shine.
So here's the vision. We want this film to show in every school around the world. We actually, we shot some of those. You know that awesome superintendent in LA? We shot some of the kids at a thing I did with the Aspen Challenge in LA. But I want this to be like back to school night, or if any of you are involved in education in any way, and you think that we can make a customized version with your education logo or anything, we want this to reach these ideas of growth mindset and the ideas of strengths that really take people out of poverty, can lead to a more meaningful life. We want this information to be spread far and wide, so please come up to me. The next 2 films we're making, one is going to be on the 21st century brain. What are the skills that you need in the 21st century to succeed in this world? And then we're doing one on gratitude, which I'm super excited about. And one of my favorite new technologies is, I don't think people talk about enough, but it's when they put that camera on the front of the phone and people can just film themselves and send it to me. I cannot tell you how powerful that is, how much I feel it. Don't you feel it in the films that they're doing this without any mediator? And you know, one of my favorite sayings and thoughts is that if you have a hammer in your hand, Abraham Maslow said it, if you have a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail. And I think if you have a camera in your hand, everything tells a story. Thank you.
There's an after party at the Aspen Meadows Reception Center. So head on over.